Greetings and welcome. I'm Dave, the AI Wizard, and today we're going to take a look at my process for using AI to generate the atmospheric illustrations and mood art for my also AI-generated Dungeons & Dragons adventure module, the Sorcerer's Tower. Now, in order to do this, we'll be using Stable Diffusion. I have a local install of Stable Diffusion. There are web interfaces available apparently as well, but I have a pretty decent PC here, so I can run this at home, and I'm using the automatic 1111 web UI. There are other good UIs available. Invoke AI in particular is a good one. It has a very good unified canvas, but I know automatic 1111 best. It's a very well developed UI, and for the purposes that I need it for these atmospheric illustrations, it does the job just fine. I generate a lot of images to go alongside my adventure module series, and this seems to be the quickest and best way to generate those images. If you haven't seen my adventure series module, then it's on the channel, but this is what we're going to be generating. This is the edit for the adventure series at the moment. It's these images that just go on the right hand side to illustrate the text. A lot of these will be incorporated into the PDF at the end as well, and a number of them will make their way into the Foundry module as background artwork for particular scenes and things like that to evoke the atmosphere. Mood art, as ChatGPT tells me it's called. So this is what we're creating, and each video takes quite a lot of these. This is the latest video as of recording that I've been working on. It's episode 4, which is the beginning of Act 2 of the adventure, which details the journey from the village of Willowdale to the Sorcerer's Tower. But there is another section here which is missing an image which I think could probably benefit from one, and it's this section here. To add some stakes to the journey, the players could face consequences for failing skill checks. For example, it's the abstract concept of consequences. That's what I've decided is the subject of this first image that I'll be generating with Stable Diffusion. This is just Stable Diffusion in its default state when you first launch it. I am running the official version 2.1 768 EMA pruned model because it's a native 768 by 768 resolution model, which I should set here. Look, you don't have to generate images at the resolution the model was trained at, but you do get the best results at that resolution, and the main reason I'm sticking with 2.1 is just because that's what I used at the beginning of the series, and I kind of want to maintain as much as possible consistency in those images throughout, although actually they've sort of improved as time has gone on quite markedly, but nonetheless I'm sticking with the model for the time being. So the next thing I do is I apply my style. Now I've got a whole bunch of styles, but specifically I've got one for the dark forest, which gives me a kind of baseline to keep these images relatively close together. Now I'm actually going to paste this style in. If I just put a prompt in now, it would automatically append the styles to it, but I actually want to see them, both so that I can explain them to you and so that I can edit them as I need to when I'm refining things. So in this case we have a digital painting of a rustic fantasy forest with tall, dense foliage and thick underbrush. Realistic, highly detailed, beautiful, fine, 4K, dynamic lighting and shadow, art by Midjourney, which is a bit of a weird one, but I put it in there after watching another video suggesting it, and it seems to work pretty well. Dark and gloomy, which is the sort of atmosphere I want to evoke for this forest. And then in the negative prompts, and negative prompts are at least as important as positive prompts, crude, rough, blurry, visible brushstrokes, smudge, cartoon, bright, extra limbs, extra fingers, broken limbs, missing fingers, watermark, signature, banner, and text. Now these extra limbs, missing limbs, extra fingers, missing fingers is very clearly an attempt to guide Stable Diffusion to create slightly better characters, and it does really help having those in there. I would recommend whenever you're generating images that include characters, I would have all of those in there. There are others that we may add, and we may take stuff away as we generate, but this is kind of my starting point for these images. Of course, I need to modify this prompt with something specific that we're looking for today. So to illustrate the idea of consequences, in my mind I'm kind of imagining maybe somebody on their knees, maybe even kind of, that scene from Lord of the Rings where Boromir is on his knees and he's all got arrows sticking out of him. Something like that, maybe, as an idea. That's sort of consequences, right? If you're on your knees and you're full of arrows, you've definitely suffered some consequences. So that's what I'm going to go for. Now, I've kind of got this character. Now, he's not perfectly consistent. It's almost impossible to get Stable Diffusion to come up with a truly consistent character in multiple different image generations. He's wearing like a blue kilt, brown leather armor. Sometimes he's got blue arms. So something like this character appears across the board. So I'd quite like to be able to get him. So I'm going to describe here what he's wearing as well. A D&D adventurer wearing a blue kilt and brown leather armor on his knees with multiple arrows stuck in him. In a rustic fantasy forest, and so on. This may or may not work. Asking for specific poses and complex compositions with like multiple things quite often runs into difficulty with Stable Diffusion, but that's fine. We can always tweak the image until we get down to what we're looking for. And the key I found is basically to just generate a whole bunch of images and then to home in on what you're looking for or what works best. So that's my initial prompt. I'm going to leave the sampling steps at 20 just so that we can generate very quickly. I've got my width and height set to 768 by 768, which is both the model resolution and what I'm aiming for all of these images. Batch count I'm going to set up to 20. I'm going to leave restore faces off for now because we're going to have to fixing his face anyway if it ends up facing the camera, and having it off will speed up generating. And at this stage it's all about speed. I just want to crack out a whole bunch of images and then see what works. So I'm watching these as it's generating, and clearly you can see the image of the character is pretty consistent again. So this seems to work pretty well for generating this particular guy, but he is definitely not on his knees. So I'm just going to interrupt the generation. So a digital painting of a D&D adventurer. I'm going to say kneeling. Kneeling on the floor. Let's see if this is any better. A digital painting of a D&D adventurer wearing a blue kilt and brown leather armor, kneeling on the floor, bleeding from multiple arrows stuck in him, in a rustic fantasy forest with tall dense foliage, etc. Let's try that instead. Well, that's better. Sort of one knee down, almost. Yeah, this is... And now he's just sort of crouching, squatting. That's pretty good. That looks like he's kneeling. I'm just going to interrupt it here. That one's pretty good. He's like down one knee. He's not really looking quite dejected enough. Proper squat there. So one thing you can do is you can increase the weighting of particular words. So I want him to be kneeling. I'm going to put 2 brackets around kneeling just to increase the weighting on kneeling. I also want these arrows to be stuck in him. I'll take the word multiple out and just change arrows with arrows stuck in him. I'm going to increase the weighting of that as well. Arrows stuck in him. And I'm not going to worry about his face just now because I'm probably going to regenerate the face. Although it's doing a pretty good job with the face, actually. You know what? Let's try adding it here with a downcast expression. Let's try that. So all I've really done is I've increased the weighting for a couple of the elements here of the prompt, and I've added a downcast expression. Still only one knee down. In fact, you know what? I'm going to interrupt again because I've just thought what I want him to be slumped. Slumped on the floor. It's a weird sounding word, isn't it? Slumped. Hopefully the AI understands it. Let's see. That's perfect. Look at that one. I mean, it's not finished generating yet. Hopefully when we come back to that one, it'll look good. It's exactly the sort of pose I was looking for, though. 20 images is quite often overkill. One of the reasons I tend to set it high and then watch the generating is when I see ones that I like, I can just interrupt and then look at what we've got. I don't necessarily have to let it generate the full 20. Sometimes I will. Sometimes I'll just wander off and leave it. You know, I've set it to generate 40 or 50 images before and then wander off, come back after, having a cup of tea, and I've got a whole bunch of images to just sort through and see what's good. Okay, so let's have a look through these and we'll pick the best one to start working on. See, this is really good. I like this kind of both knees down, holding on to, I don't know what this is meant to be exactly, but he's holding on to it, whatever he is. You've got the forest in the background there. It's good. It's a good starting point. Let's see if it's the best. It looks like he's actually got something approaching an arrow in him there, which is interesting. The more you ask for a specific pose and try and force a specific pose, the more difficult it is to get a really good generation. So I've kind of made life a little bit difficult for myself with that. But I think we're just going to go with this one. There we go. Second image generated in my 20 image run there, and it's the one that we're going to go with. So let me send that to image first. So the next step that I will often do is I will take the image that's been generated from text to image, and I'll just run it again through image to image. So I'm going to keep the exact same prompt, and all the other settings more or less correct. I'm going to increase the sampling steps up to, let's go up to something like 90. You could get away with a much lower sampling steps here if you wanted to, but I've got a pretty beefy GPU, so I think it's fine. And we'll just do 5 images. I'm going to leave the denoising strength at 0.75. I might bring that down a little bit. I'm going to increase my CFG scale. So this is the weighting of the prompt, how much it tries to adhere to the specific wording of the prompt. I'm going to increase that to 9. You don't want to go too high with this or things will get really weird. But I'm hoping that with a little bit more weighting in CFG, we might start seeing some arrows sticking in him. But there's no guarantee of that. In fact, I am going to lower the denoising strength just a shade down to 0.7 because I want to keep this composition more or less as it is. The lower the denoising strength, the more likely that is to happen. Let's see what it generates. Okay, I'm just going to interrupt it here because clearly this arrow part is confusing it. It's trying to put a bunch of arrows into odd places and it's just kind of messing the image up. So I'm going to take the arrows out entirely. I might leave bleeding in there just in case it adds it in. On the floor, bleeding with a downcast expression in a rustic fantasy forest. So I've taken the arrows out entirely and I'm just going to generate again. There's some pretty interesting results here. Some of these are quite good, but the extra detail I don't think is working for us. And this original image is still, in my opinion, the best image. I think it's probably the best one to actually start from. So let's send this to inpainting, and we're going to change our denoising strength to 0.5. And we're going to change here to only masked. That means that we're going to inpaint. The area that we inpaint will be doing at full resolution, and I think we can use this to improve his face here a little bit. So let me just, I'm going to leave the prompt the same because it's already focused pretty much on the character, and then we'll just draw a mask. In fact, hold on, I'm just going to keep this mask limited just to his face, and I'm going to leave the hair and things on the outside untouched by it. And what this should do is just limit that generation to fit within his face. Okay, and that one is clearly better. This one, it's a bit odd. But that one, that is pretty awesome. He's got this downcast expression, which is really evocative of this idea, this sense of consequences that we're going for. Great, so we're going to use this. We need to remember to click send to inpainting. So this goes back into our working area here, and then we can work on some of these other little areas, like these odd spiky things at the bottom. And I'm going to up the denoising strength so the AI isn't so constrained with what it can generate. For the sake of speed, let's not even change the prompt. We're just going to go ahead and generate this straight away and see what happens. Oh, it's, it's made a little man kneeling. Okay, I probably should change the prompt. Also, I think I've probably gone a little bit overboard on this denoising strength. 0.89 is very high. We do need some degree of denoising strength there to allow the AI room to generate something new, but clearly we went overboard. So this is an important lesson. If you want to inpaint something out, you do sometimes need to modify the prompt, especially if you have a high denoising strength. So a digital painting of a rustic fantasy forest floor in this instance, because we're not actually generating the forest. Need to set the denoising strength lower. So what we'll probably find is it'll turn this into something that fits. Well, it's kind of getting there. We can just send it to inpainting again, generate again. There we go. It's going to turn it into a leaf. That's this one. It's a nice little leaf. Let's give it one more generate, and we'll also increase the area a little bit that we're covering. There we go. That one's good. Big curvy leaf just entering the frame. I'll send that to inpainting. I'll do the same thing on the other side for this. This is just a repeat of what I did on the other side, so we'll skip through it at 5 times speed here. Now, if I really wanted to gussy up this picture, I could add something here that he's sort of lamenting over. Maybe like an empty helmet. That might work, mightn't it? Let me see if I can do that, because that would be quite a nice touch if we had here like an empty helmet. An empty, bloody, medieval helmet. Now I'm going to need to whack the denoising strength up pretty high, because we're basically turning forest floor into a helmet. Let's see if it can do it. It's going to struggle with this. So I could try and sketch a helmet in here. This isn't something that I do very often, but if I click sketch, now I can actually draw. So I can get like some grey up and I can try and draw a helmet. Again, we'll just speed through this woefully inept attempt to hand draw a helmet into the image. This is obviously an appalling helmet, but if we now copy this to in-painting, mask over all of this, and we say to it, we want a digital painting of an empty, bloody medieval helmet on the floor. Predictably, this attempt to hand draw a helmet very poorly, and then use Stable Diffusion to try and turn that into a real helmet, fails horribly. But I'm going to leave it in here at 5 times speed just for completeness of the video. We're going to move on to a much more successful technique in a moment though. Fear not, there is something else we can try here, and that's to use Stable Diffusion to generate the image of the helmet directly from text to image, and then paste that across or combine it using an image editing program. Digital painting of an empty bloody medieval helmet on a forest floor. Let's generate that. This is really interesting. We're just getting kind of skull helmets here, possibly because we've got bloody in the prompt, but we can try and tune that out by adding skull and bones to our negative prompt here. And again, we're just going to speed through what turned out to be quite a protracted process of honing in on the right prompt. I had to add some more negative prompts, modern and World War II, and then I just kept tweaking and modifying the main prompt because Stable Diffusion was really not understanding what I was after. In fact, and this is a really good tip, at one point I went back to ChatGPT and asked it how it would describe a knight's helmet, and it very helpfully comes back with a description including words like visor and faceplate. So I integrate those into my prompt, and finally we start making some progress. We're starting to see proper medieval knight type helmets, at least some of the generations are. More tweaking of the prompt, more generations later, we finally end up with something that I'm moderately happy with, and the next step is to take both of those images into an image editing program. I'm going to use GIMP here because it's free, and then just sort of combine them together, kit bash them into an image that we can feed back into Stable Diffusion to basically act as a seed image so that we can tell Stable Diffusion kind of broadly what we're looking for, what this should look like. And I do need to do a few things just to make it fit together, otherwise it's going to confuse the AI. I'm just kind of painting in a bit of ground detail. It doesn't need to be very good. Ultimately, this is going to be completely changed when we run it through Stable Diffusion. So we just save it there, and then back in Stable Diffusion, we just import the image into our little in-painting window. I'm also going to take the original prompt from the text to image window and paste it into the image to image window. And I don't know if this is a great idea or not, but I'm going to use the seed that I used to generate. Now, this probably won't make much difference because the final image will be so different from that original anyway. Just because of where it is, but I'm going to paste it in here. It's sort of an experiment. We'll see how it goes. Then we just mask out our little helmet area here. All of our other in-painting options remain the same. We're going to set the denoising strength to something decent like, let's say 0.5 or maybe 0.45. There we go. And then we generate, and indeed we run through a couple more cycles of generating before finally, after a few more tweaks, changing the mask a little bit here and there, we end up starting to get something very close to what I had in mind, even if it's a little on the small side. This would be great if the person or the character he was lamenting was perhaps some sort of gnome knight. Like, it's too small of a helmet for a human of his sort of size. I think that one probably encapsulates it a little bit better. It would be nice if there was a pool of blood around here. In fact, let's modify the prompt to try and bring that out. We're going to add here some more weighting on large gash, and let's just include lying on its side in a pool of blood, and we'll increase the weighting of pool of blood as well. And let's see what that gets us. And as it turns out, more blood and more gash was the key to finally unlock this image and get it the way that I wanted it, and the way that I had sort of pictured in my mind when I set out on this journey. In real life, when I was recording this video, a good couple of hours before this point. Now, I've edited a good deal of that out and sped up the rest, but I don't want to misrepresent the idea that you can get to an image like this every time super quickly with Stable Diffusion. That's not the way that it works. Sometimes you will get a fantastic image from your original prompt, from just a single text prompt, and that's awesome when that happens. But if you've got a more detailed image in mind, if you've got a more complicated composition in mind, or a very specific image that you want to use Stable Diffusion to create, then you have to expect that it'll take a little bit of time to tweak and hone in on that image, and you'll have to make use of things like image to image, in-painting, potentially out-painting, and even using an external tool like GIMP or Photoshop to kit bash together bits of an image that you can then feed back into Stable Diffusion and use Stable Diffusion's imagination to patch that into a coherent single image. And I'm really happy with the way this turned out in the end. I think this is a fantastic image. In fact, there were a few from that final generation that I would be very happy to have used in the Sorcerer's Tower, but I went with this one, and as I say, I'm absolutely thrilled with it. I think it's a fantastic image, and to be fair, I've spent a lot longer on it than I would on most of the images that I include in the Sorcerer's Tower. Partly because I had a very specific idea in my mind and I wanted to make sure that I could actually achieve it. Partly because, of course, I was recording this video, so it became kind of a mission that I had to complete. And complete it we have. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and indeed perhaps even found it enlightening or informative for your own image generation purposes. If you want to see more Stable Diffusion content on the channel, do let me know. Leave a comment, leave a like. Obviously, there's been a lot of ChatGPT content, and that generally has done a little bit better than the Stable Diffusion content, but I think this is at least as exciting an area of AI and the things that we can do with it, the capabilities that it unlocks. I already could write creatively for my Dungeons & Dragons campaign, but I could never produce this kind of art. I just didn't have the skill or the talent or the time to be able to produce this sort of art for my games. Now I can, and even if I didn't have the channel, I would be using Stable Diffusion to create cool artwork to enhance my role-playing game. There is so much more interesting things that these AIs are unlocking for us, and it's improving all the time. But until that future comes upon us, I think that's it for now. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, etc. And until next time, I'll see you later.